Try Jesus Auburn family. It's Dustin with you once again. Pastor Miguel couldn't be here with us today because this is a bit of an impromptu last minute recording. I want to talk to you about those Olympic opening ceremonies because there was something there that was spiritually related that had to do with Jesus and the Last Supper and what did that all mean. We're going to take some time to unpack it just a little bit here today. But first of all, I have to say this. Don't adjust your screens. I have a sunburn on my nose. It's red. I get it. I understand. I was out watching my son's baseball tournament this past weekend, and I got a little bit too much sun, and it shows on my nose. So if your screen is showing me a little bit like Rudolph, it's okay. It's all right. But welcome in once again. I did want to talk about those opening ceremonies at the Olympics. The Olympics are an exciting time. My family loves to watch them. There were some really interesting moments in the opening ceremonies. It was much different than the rest of the opening ceremonies we've seen in recent memory. Um, I love the laser show on the Eiffel Tower and Celine Dion singing. If you know anything about her story and what she's been going through, to see her up there was pretty powerful. But there are a few things in there that we don't have time to unpack all of them. But that Last Supper scene with that blue guy coming out from under the platter, what was that all about? There's an uproar on social media. People are upset. Christians are upset. They say they were mocking Jesus in that scene. What was really going on? And I have to say to you, I at first was pretty offended as well. But I've learned some lessons, and I want to share those with you here about how to react when something like that happens, when we're offended or somebody says or does something that seems to be offensive to our faith. But if you're not familiar with it yet, and you haven't seen the pictures online, basically in one of the scenes that they depicted a Last Supper scene, and of course, hearkening back to Leonardo da Vinci and his painting of the Last Supper. And there was a figure in the middle that was the Jesus figure, and it was a woman, and she had a sort of a pagan sunburst behind her head, and she was surrounded by trans individuals. And then a little bit later, there's this big platter that's placed in the middle of the table. And they take the cover off the platter, and inside is this Smurf looking guy, this blue guy. And he has some odd mannerisms, and he's doing some things that are pretty confusing. People don't know what this is all about. Well, let's take some time a little bit to understand what was taking place there. So the blue guy was Dionysus or Bacchus. And I'll talk a little bit more about who he is and what he represents here in just a couple of minutes. But one thing that's interesting is that after there was such an uproar from Christians, the Olympic organizers apologized. But if you read their apology, they basically say, we don't know why people were so offended. I'm sorry if we did something wrong, if we offended people, but that wasn't our intention. We don't understand it. You know, this human family is broad and wide, and it's really interesting. Sometimes we can be using the same words in the same language, but not understanding each other at all. And if we don't use the gifts that God has given to us to discern and translate and understand each other, we're just going to be talking past each other and butting heads. And so that's what I want to bring out here today. So we need to avoid, as followers of Jesus, we need to do our best to avoid getting fired up about things right away that are seemingly offensive to our faith. And I will admit, I am still a little bit upset at the Olympic organizers, despite what I'm going to share with you here. I am still a little bit upset with the Olympic organizers because they did play fast and loose with something pretty important to Christians, and it was really irresponsible. But there's more going on here than meets the eye. So the reason that we need to try to avoid being so upset by things like this is that it prevents us from asking the question, why? Why did they do that? What's behind that? Let me calm my emotions. Let me calm my anger here and do a little research and understand what it was that they were exactly trying to depict and say. Because even if it's wrong, if I'm not able to discern it well and think it through, I'm not going to be able to come up with a very intelligent and Christ like response that I should have. So, calming ourselves, not reacting, not saying anything on that first reaction is really important to give ourselves an opportunity to adjust and think and research. And when we do react that way, it actually makes Jesus look weaker. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. But let's look further into what was going on. And it goes all the way back to the history of France, into the French Revolution in the 1700s, and what was taking place during the Renaissance. Uh, in the 1700s, in 1793, according to my notes, there was a woman by the name of Sophie Momoro, and they were holding a festival, a celebration at the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and they paraded Sophie Momoro out on a horse. She was scantily clad, and she represented the goddess of reason. Because if you know anything about the Renaissance and the French Revolution, it was all about humanism. And so, humanism and human reasoning, the ability for humans to solve our problems without the intervention of deities, without the existence of gods, it was the celebration of human ability, human thought, human rationalism in order to better a society. And in that time, they began to view the church as holding back human reason and having a stranglehold on freedom and rights and things at the time. So, right there in Notre Dame, the famed cathedral, beautiful cathedral, they rode Sophie Momoro on a horse and celebrated her as the goddess of reason or human reason. And I suspect that that woman at the Last Supper depiction at the Olympics was actually hearkening back to the goddess of reason. And when you looked at her, you saw her forming that, cliche symbol of the heart with her hands. And so, what was actually taking place there in that depiction of the Last Supper was the way that the French and also many people in other cultures have begun to relate since the French Revolution and the Renaissance, begun to relate to the church and begun to relate to Christianity and religion as a whole. They think of it as a way of thinking. So rather than believing in a God or a risen Savior like Christians do, who's in the world today and reacting, they take the tenets of these religions and they take what's good and what's right and what they can apply to society without the God of that religion and take the tenets of the truths of those religions. So they depict the Last Supper because what does the Last Supper teach humans in a humanistic way? It teaches us acceptance. It teaches us loving the outcasts, which is why she was surrounded by trans people, because many view trans people as the outcasts of society who are trying to come to prominence and be accepted. So the Last Supper depicts this acceptance, this love, this appreciation of people who are outcasts or who are downtrodden or don't have the same opportunities as the rest of us. So humanism takes from Christianity the beauty of the teachings of Jesus while not believing that Jesus exists. So the Last Supper is seated there. Now, where does Bacchus come in, or Dionysus? So Dionysus comes in under that platter, and Dionysus was the god of partying, of revelry, of joy, of breaking down barriers through partying and having a good time. So he comes out at the center of the platter, and it's almost like saying, this is what the goal of humanity is all about: breaking down barriers, enjoying each other, having a good time, having friendships, and despite cultural stereotypes, breaking down these things. So, in my view, that depiction of the Last Supper was a celebration of humanism that began back in the Renaissance in the 1700s, was maybe hearkening back to 1793 with the Goddess of Reason, and celebrating the what they view are the good tenets of Christianity: togetherness, love, inclusion, unity. And Bacchus also sharing that same uh, ideology with the Greek mythology, where he began in Greek mythology. So, what's interesting about this is that they also probably believe they were celebrating Leonardo da Vinci himself. There's no real strong evidence that Da Vinci was a Christian. It's believed that he probably was and was attached to the Catholic Church in some way, but we don't know for sure. We also know that he was really into the metaphysical world. We know that he was into science. But we also know that Da Vinci was heavily interested in, yes, you guessed it, Greek mythology. So the French may have been believing that they were celebrating Da Vinci in that scene, the tenets of Christianity coming together with the tenets of Greek mythology, leaving behind the gods. It wasn't Jesus that was depicted there, but celebrating humanism and our ability to come together as people. Now, again, what we need to realize, though, and the reason that I remain a bit offended by it, is that we believe that Jesus is living and alive. He's God and he's in our lives. And so to take that figure out of that scene was really being irresponsible toward Christians. So, but what we need to do is realize, okay, how do I respond or how do I react as a Christian here? How am I supposed to respond to this? And naturally, our reaction is, I got to fight it, because there's so much happening in our culture and society. It feels like people are so turned off to spiritual things. Let me share a story with you. When I was in high school, I was a Christian. I stood up for my faith. I made many decisions about how to witness and show my faith in Jesus in high school. And I had some friends that were not Christians, and they would regularly mock my religion. I still thought they loved me and they appreciated me as a person, but they would mock my religion at times, mock my beliefs. And one day I just got fed up with it with one of my friends. And I was in class with him and he said something in front of, I think it was in front of a girl, and it embarrassed me. And I was over at the time sharpening my pencil. And I heard him say it. And as I was walking back from the pencil sharpener, I took my pencil and I chucked that thing across the room, and it hit him right here, like this, right under his eye. I believe God intervened so that didn't hit him in the eye, because I would have been in a ton of trouble. And so I had to stop and think about it. And I talked to him later on about it, because I told him how upset. At first, I apologized. I said I never should have done that. But why do you mock my faith? Why do you mock my religion? And he said something that has stuck with me, and I think we can apply to situations like this. He said, I mock it because I don't understand it. I don't understand why you do the things that you do, or why you believe the things that you believe. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, and it has rung true throughout my life when people have mocked my faith or questioned it. I found that 9 times out of 10, and there is that one case where people are just making fun of you and they have no interest, but the majority of people are actually not turned off to spiritual things. They actually are interested in it. They just don't know how to ask about it. And if we automatically respond to criticism or the mocking of our faith with anger and chucking pencils at people, it actually makes Jesus look weak, because now he's not shining through us. And it makes it destroys our witness for him. And it makes our faith reduced to just a way of thinking, which is what the French are saying. Christianity is just a way of thought. It's not a living, breathing deity, Jesus, Savior living in our lives. It's just simply a philosophy, an ideology. And Elon Musk he says, I'm a cultural Christian. He believes in the tenets of Christianity without believing in the God of Christianity. And so there's a lot of this going around in our society right now. So we need to learn the lesson that when things like this happen, we shouldn't respond with anger and revenge and lashing out. We need to stop and say, Lord, what can I learn from this? And how can I speak through this to bring glory and honor to Jesus? Because that's what it's all about. So rather than getting defensive, how can we show that Jesus is alive through this mocking of our faith, questioning of our faith, disrespect that we felt? So I want to read a passage of the Bible that I think we can take with us from this. It's in First Corinthians, and what the Apostle Paul is doing here is he's listing all of these gifts that God gives us in our lives when we follow Jesus. The Holy Spirit comes into our lives, and he gives us all these gifts. And I want you to really listen to this. First Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 10. So this is in the list that God of abilities and gifts that God gives us. To another person, he gives the working of miracles, so miraculous things. To another one, prophecy or telling people about Jesus. To another, the ability to distinguish between spirits. In other Bible versions, it calls it discernment. So using good judgment. Discernment. So using good judgment is a gift or a proof that Jesus is working in our lives. To another, the various speaking, being able to speak different languages. To another, the interpretation of those languages. Powerful stuff here. So you see that discernment, using good judgment, being able to speak languages, and being able to understand languages is important. So what we need to grasp from this is that even if you know a language, it doesn't mean you know how to communicate. So maybe you've even felt this in your own family. Like you grew up in the same house, but it seems like you and your sibling are on totally different wavelengths. It's like you can't even communicate. Or maybe you find that in your workplace. See, our upbringing, our background, our education, our experiences all color the way we see this world. And so, what the Bible's saying there is that Jesus can come into our lives and teach us how to communicate, truly break through those cultural barriers, break through those preconceived notions, biases, questions. He can work through those situations, and he can actually allow us to share the good news of Jesus and minister to each other and minister to people that we don't identify with. So, this example of the Olympics is a perfect picture of that. As Americans, as Christians, we looked at that situation and automatically were offended. And there were parts of it, again, I will say, that I still am offended about. But the fact of the matter is, if I get stuck in my defensiveness or my offense in my different worldview and don't allow Jesus to work through me and ask the question, why? Why did they depict that? Why did they say that? What were they actually saying there? If I can understand where they are coming from, now I have the ability to speak to their understanding and being able to share goodness and mercy and love and Jesus with them. Anger makes barriers, makes walls. The love of Jesus breaks them down and builds bridges. And that's what we need to be about as Christians. Not building up walls, but building bridges. So I want to encourage you, when something like this happens in your life, when your faith is tested, when people persecute you, avoid the first reaction, anger and vitriol and wanting to lash out and throw pencils at people. Avoid that. Pray, ask Jesus to come into your life, and through that bridge building, understanding where people are coming from, God's power will be on full display and it will show Jesus is alive. Thank you for joining me today. I wanted to share this about the Olympics and the opening ceremony. There's so much going on there. Please follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify. our website, tryjesusauburn.com, for more content like this and much more. God bless you. We'll see you soon.